Hi, it's lankygameruk Mick Woods, and welcome to part 3 of my social media journey. And in this session, we're going to be taking a look at the generation guide. So I've called it the generation guide, and we're talking about the different guides that have been created by marketers somewhat arbitrarily. But if I said to you, what is a millennium or a baby boomer or Generation X and so on, would you know? And it's important that we do know because we're trying to sell products or services to different generations, and they all have different desires and wants and so on. So before we get into the social marketing aspect of the different channels such as Pinterest or Instagram, Facebook and so on, first of all, we're going to look at who our customers are going to be. So the first group we're going to look at are called the Traditionalists. It's important to know that these names are, there's lots of different names for the same group of people. So Traditionalists have been subdivided in some ways into two groups. What I call the greatest generation is from 1900, 1924. And in that generation, the people experienced the Great Depression, First World War, and they had to be team members. They had to overcome tremendous difficulties. So they were known as the greatest generation. And I guess in our turn, they would be our great grandparents, grandfathers, and grandmothers. And the second part of the traditionalists are what we call the silent generation, and they will be from 1925-ish until 1945 when the war finished. And they grew up in an age where they were seen and not heard, which is why they're called the silent generation. They would have lived during the two world wars. So at the end of the First World War in 1918 to the beginning of World War II in 1939, that's when they grew up with Gone with the Wind, jazz, swing, things like that. This was a generation where mum stayed at home. There was no feminism and things like that. Men tended to work just for one employer for their whole lifetime. And people, this generation, they worked hard and kept quiet. They didn't protest. They weren't in the era of, say, Martin Luther King and people like that. So that is the traditionalists split up into two: the greatest generation and the silent generation. Okay, so the next generation are known as the baby boomers, and these were people who were born after the war, so 1946 to 1964, I guess. And the Daily Telegraph, or the Telegraph, summed it up really well, and I'm just going to quote it. These people, the baby boomers, were born in the years after World War II, when there was, thanks to the soldier returning home, a significant growth in births, both in America and in the UK. These are the men and women who turned in, got high, dropped out, dodged the draft, swung in the 60s, became hippies in the 70s. And Bill Clinton would be classed as one of these, and he even made it to the White House. They're idealistic, uncynical. This was the generation that fought the Cold War, and smashed down the Berlin Wall. So this group can also be segmented into two. We've got the leading edge baby boomers. They were born between 1946 and 1955. They came of age during the Vietnam War, for example. And then the second half of the group, born in 1956 to 64, they're called late bloomers or trailing edge boomers. So this is the era of rock and roll, Elvis, the Beatles, Woodstock, miniskirts, Barbie, things like that. They tended to be the first generation that had two incomes. the first TV generation, the first divorce generation. Divorces are becoming more acceptable. So that's the baby boomers. So the next generation, classed as Generation X, they will be born in 1965 till sort of 1976, which would, they were described often as latchkey kids. They were street smart, but they were very much isolated. Often they had divorced parents or parents who were really career driven, so these kids were often on their own. This is the age of Sloane Rangers and the yuppies. Most of them will have gone to school where there wasn't computers. And maybe then when they got to sort of high school or uni, computers just been introduced. They didn't really want long-term careers, and a lot of them average 6 or 7 different career jobs during their lifetime. Often they didn't get married. They would cohabit a lot more. And if they did get married, divorce was just an easy option. And there are many, many single parents. This generation would be called the MTV kids, I guess. They looked at music videos. I very clearly remember the very first music video, which was Aha, Take On Me. I remember it clearly. So the Generation X would have new wave and punk, heavy metal, and things like that. This is the age of Nirvana, U2, Madonna, torn jeans, Friends, and things like that. They're also very much into brand names and labels. They want it, and they want it now, so often they'd have lots of debt. And often they would say, what's in it for me? Okay, so the next group will be Generation Y, or Millennials. Again, they're split into 2 millennials. We've got the Y1, or maturing millennials, Y2, the milestone millennials. And these, I mean, the dates aren't precise when these things work, but we're talking about sort of 1977, 78, up to the mid to late 90s, 97, something like that. Millennials, sophisticated in terms of computers. They've never known anything else. They've always had computers. They're almost immune to the old traditional marketing tricks. They've seen it all, exposed to it all from almost the day they were born. Then we've got Generation Z, born after 1995, 96, 97, something like that. So they'll be the early 20s now at the latest. They've never known a world without computers, mobile phones or cell phones. Technology is just that's how they do everything. I look at my grandkids and they're using iPads and iPhones, and they're like under 6 years old, and it's incredible. They know what they want, they know how to get it, they're tech savvy, they've been bombarded with brands and so on, and you can see that when you go on the computer now. You search on Google for something, and before you know it, you've got adverts bombarding you. These are people who will live in a world of 3D printing, driverless cars, and so on, and they're known as technoholics rather than alcoholics, because they're completely dependent on IT. And there's loads of research on all these different generations, and I'll leave you to have a look for yourself, but just a very brief overview of the different generations that there are.